Imagine you just had a long day at work, or spent the past 6 hours dealing with your in-laws, or the entire afternoon and evening ferrying your kids from school to piano lessons, to Little League, and to post-game pizza and ice cream. You kick off your shoes and take a deep breath. You don't want to crack open that thick brick of a literary novel and try to figure out what's going on in the story. You want to crack open a beer or a box of wine and just relax. So you fire up your streaming service of choice and let your mind shut down. Oh, it's comforting, isn't it? Benson and Stabler are going to find that dentist who adopts kids for all the wrong reasons. Lenny Briscoe is going to find out whose foot was found in the dumpster next to that park in Tribeca. Goran and Eames won't rest until they figure out whether that totally fictionalized version of a Kennedy kid released that revenge porn on his Hudson University co-ed ex-girlfriend. That's right, when your brain has been wrung out by the stress of the day and the first yawn hits, you just want to enjoy a full story, beginning, middle, and end. You want a clear dilemma with a satisfying conclusion. You may be wondering what the Law & Order franchise has to do with HARLEQUIN's romance novel lines, but guess what? They're more similar than you might think. In the literary world, novels that hew to a formula are considered especially satisfying. In the writing community, the dedicated writers who craft these popular stories are members of an elite squad known as romance novelists. And here's what we can learn from them. But first, a word from our sponsor, Catharsis. Catharsis is when a story inspires a purge of negative emotion that makes the reader feel better. First discovered a few thousand years ago, Aristotle realized that when a person experiences a story that makes them sad, that person ends up a little more chipper. The Greek spectators to the great Dionysus watched Oedipus ignore all of that good advice, and as the king ripped out his eyeballs, the audience felt better about themselves and their own petty problems. It's kind of like what happens when people watch Maury today. Catharsis. Use the promo code Allison, that's ALLISON, for 20% off. In no time, you'll be creating stories like The Notebook, in which the reader relates in some way to the tragedy, and has a good cry, allowing them to feel better because they have allowed themselves to forget, for even a brief moment, that their lives and loves are temporary, and that everyone who cares about them will someday die, and their life, in the big scheme of things, was meaningless and insignificant. Okay, we're back. I happened to see one of Meghann Whistler's tweets in which she beamed about the publication of her first novel, Falling for the Innkeeper. It's part of HARLEQUIN's love-inspired line of category romances. As the name suggests, these books are G-rated, both in terms of the movie reading equivalent and in the big G, God. HARLEQUIN has plenty of other lines. If you're looking for something a little spicier, check out their Desire line of novels, but don't bring it on public transport. I was touched by Ms. Whistler's happiness. While I may have a cold, shriveled black heart, I couldn't help but be happy for her and the success she had achieved. When I saw the last copy of the novel on the shelf of my local big box store, I couldn't help but pick it up. If you recall, the hook for this video is the comparison between a HARLEQUIN romance novel and an episode of Law & Order. The truth is that these two very different works have a lot in common. Perhaps the most important quality of these works is consistency. You know exactly what you're going to get when you settle in for a little time with the Special Victims Unit. You know exactly what you're going to get when you open up a HARLEQUIN romance. Law & Order has a very distinct formula. The teaser in which the kids who are playing jacks in an alley find a body. The first act in which the detective questions witnesses and suspects. The second act in which it turns out that the first suspect is innocent, but they find the real person who done it. Third act, DA plots case. Fourth act, bad guy or bad girl is found guilty. Are these works as substantive as something like Breaking Bad? No. And yes, I'm currently rewatching Season 5 as I write this script. So say his name. These works are, however, popular and pleasing. What else do you want out of anything? Meghann Whistler has a lot to be proud of in Falling for the Innkeeper. I spent a lazy afternoon reading the book in one go. Let's take a look at the back of book synopsis. A battle for a charming Cape Cod inn. But what happens when romance checks in? Single mom Laura Lessaway won't accept her mother's plan of selling her late grandmother's inn without a fight. But when big city attorney Jonathan Masters arrives to arrange an offer from his client, she's drawn to him. And working together as he helps with repairs only brings them closer. With his career and her home on the line, can they ever find common ground? Alright, is this War and Peace? No. But that's a good thing. Ms. Whistler is adhering to an author's primary responsibility. She makes a very clear promise to the reader. The summary essentially tells the reader everything that he or she, okay, in this case, mostly she, is going to get from this story. Beautiful single mother who has a big problem. Rich, slightly older professional man comes to town. He and she work together closely and learn about each other. And then that ending question. As I've said before, if there's a question at the end of a book summary, the answer is usually yes. And this is especially true in a romance novel. It's not exactly a spoiler alert to say that the characters end up together. If they didn't end up together, you would be disappointed. Just like you'd be disappointed if a Law and Order DA decided that he or she just didn't feel like prosecuting someone who was amputating limbs as part of a whole Craigslist thing. Like many Harlequin writers, Ms. Whistler doesn't mess around. Look at the first 3 paragraphs of the book. Jonathan Masters pulled up in front of the Sea Glass Inn, turned off his GPS inside. How had he gotten himself into this? He really didn't want to intrude on a single mother and her young daughter right at dinner time. A 6th-year associate at Myers, Subin & Rowe, the top corporate law firm in Boston, Jonathan had left work early to drive to the sleepy Cape Cod town of Wychmere Bay to take care of some new business. This little inn wasn't the new business, of course, but if he could ensure that Carberry Hotels acquired this prime piece of beachfront property, there was a good chance that the luxury hotel chain would hire Jonathan's firm for all its legal needs. And if Jonathan wanted to make partner, as his mentor Mike Rowe had told him just a few nights ago, he needed to prove he was a closer. In the space of only 3 paragraphs, we have the inciting incident and the big stakes for the protagonist. Can you say the same for your own work? What's the inciting incident? It's the moment after which everything has changed. Rose DeWitt Bucator's life is set. She's going to marry a hot rich guy and live happily ever after. Well, you know what I mean. According to Rose's status quo, she's going to live a miserable life in a beautiful golden gilded cage. Or maybe she'll jump into the icy Atlantic. Why doesn't that happen? Because Jack is good at playing cards, and he won a ticket for the maiden voyage of the Titanic, the unsinkable ship. Lucky him! If Jack doesn't win that hand, there's no story. The inciting incident of falling for the innkeeper is the moment that Jonathan, or Mr. Jonathan, as Laura's adorable daughter calls him, meets the beautiful and hurting single mom. Before that, every day was the same for Jonathan, a status quo. He's a workaholic. Isolated from family and friends. All he cares about is becoming a partner at his law firm, and then everything is different. And I love that Ms. Whistler begins with this important moment. The same goes for Laura. She has ignored her romantic needs because her ex-husband was such a, every day is the same, caring for her daughter and friends and community and church, but not for herself. And then a super sexy attorney who likes to exercise every morning literally shows up on her doorstep, and the author doesn't make us wait. She also doesn't make us wait for the other big necessity that a great story needs, the stakes. If Jonathan doesn't make a deal with Laura to buy the Sea Glass Inn, he's going to be out of a job. Harlequin romances don't make you wait for these very important elements of storytelling, and neither does Law and Order. See? The comparison isn't as nuts as you thought. Let's talk about why I was able to read Miss Whistler's book in only a couple hours. Like most category Harlequin romances, the book is somewhere between 50 and 60,000 words. Most literary novels are going to be much more. That's at the low end. The Harlequin editors are highly regimented. This isn't F. Scott Fitzgerald laboring with Max Perkins to sculpt the Great Gatsby from fountain pen marked pages. Just like the people who craft Law and Order stories, there's a discrete formula that works, and it's a good thing. Super hot guy who is decent at heart and wounded woman meet. This can be a love at first sight thing, or they can hate each other at first. Then some situation forces them to deal with each other. Maybe he needs a pretend wife to satisfy his family or business associates. Maybe she's hiding out in Amish country to avoid English or bad guys. Surprise, surprise, they feel a mutual attraction. They fall in love, but they won't admit it to each other. Not until they have a blow-up on page 147 of 216. Then, the two characters are separated, only to realize they can't live without each other. So they're reunited on page 207 of 216. Then, happily ever after. Again, adherence to a strict formula, Harlequins or otherwise, doesn't result in the most literary work. But you know what? That's okay. What matters most is what a writer does with the conventions, tropes, and structure. For example, I noticed that Ms. Whistler has some very long scenes in the book. Pages 38 to 55. That's 18 pages. That's 8% of the book. That's double the amount of page space Ms. Whistler devotes to Laura and Jonathan as a real couple. Why was this scene so long? Because it was the lovers' first real kinda date. The author didn't waste any page space. Every part of that section has a point. Laura doesn't think that Jonathan can fix a dishwasher because he's just a Harvard lawyer who's all fancy. But he can. He buys rat traps to further demonstrate his value to Laura. They meet shopkeepers along the way. All of them know and love her. She has a place in a community. Jonathan does not. And Jonathan, though he has a hard body and is super hot, also enjoys eating fudge. This is the perfect man. Now, I've never been married. You're welcome, ladies. But I do wonder if weddings mimic the ending of a Harlequin romance. There's a big to-do. Lots of planning. Lots of wondering what it will be like when you say, I do. Then the next day, all of the fanfare is over. The wedding's over, and now it's marriage time. Miss Whistler does what most Harlequin romances do. She focuses on the fun part of the relationship, when everything is new and you're still finding things out about your beloved. Okay, now I'm tempted to write a parody of the romance novel that is about the marriage. Falling for the Innkeeper is a very sweet first novel written with an admirable amount of craft and skill. Even if you don't generally read inspirational romance, it's worth checking out. Ms. Whistler uses the religious elements in the story in the proper manner. They're just part of the backdrop and they keep the plot going. Just like submarine jargon is part of a Tom Clancy thriller. Oh, and it takes place on Cape Cod. I lived on Cape Cod for a couple of summers. I miss it. It's a beautiful place. So, let's recap because that's what teachers do. What can we steal from the Harlequin formula and Meghann Whistler's Falling for the Innkeeper? 1. Fulfill a promise to the reader. If you buy a ticket to a heist movie, then by Jove, you expect to see a heist. You better see a bunch of people make a plan to steal money or a big diamond or something. Those people better carry out the heist and overcome some unforeseen complications. In the end, they must succeed in some way. If the heist movie doesn't feature a heist, you will get mad. Look at this cover. I knew going in that those two attractive people would fall in love. Again, it's not a spoiler to say things worked out. 2. Establish the inciting incident and stakes quickly. In order for us to care about the protagonist and his or her plight, we must know what that plight means to the character. Why does Batman go around Batmaning? Because he has a deep-seated need to fight crime because of what happened to his parents. What will happen if Lovell, Hayes, and Swagger can't scrub the CO2 from the lem? They all die. 3. Adhere to the formula, at least mostly. While I've talked about how stories can adhere very strongly to a formula, you should also remember that formulas are a little bit like recipes. If you make beef stroganoff, you can adhere completely to that recipe. Buy the book. But if you add a little more beef or slightly different spices, it's still beef stroganoff, and it might even be better. You just can't add marshmallows. That would be violating the recipe. And speaking of category romance novels, check out my satirical romance novel, Ignoring That She Thinks She's a Witch. Link in the description. It's a category I created, the guy-friendly romance. It's short and sweet and hot. Let's see if I followed my own advice in constructing the book. Here's the summary. After getting dumped by Tatiana, a super hot redhead, Bryce buried himself in the cold equations of his work as an actuary. After all, what were the odds that he could find a woman who was a logical match for him? Then he meets Julie. She's beautiful. She has a great body. Best of all, she's an attorney, someone who makes her living by thinking and acting in a rational manner. Can you imagine? A woman who doesn't get mad at a guy for forgetting her mother's cat's birthday or the things he said in her dreams. Everything is perfect until Bryce finally notices the many hints about the fact that could come between them. Julie thinks she's a witch. Will Bryce be able to get over his hang-up about Julie's belief in the spirituality of nature? Or will he miss his chance with a financially secure woman who keeps it tight? Oh, and who loves him or something. Ignoring That She Thinks She's a Witch is part romance, part satire, and 100% fun. The first guy-friendly romance, this novelette will appeal to romance readers as well as guys who enjoy love stories like The Terminator, Goodfellas, and RoboCop. Seriously, think about it. Those stories are pretty romantic. Basically. Okay, so I have a hot, hard-charging professional guy who has been hurt. I have a beautiful, good-hearted woman who has prioritized her own life instead of needing a guy. There's mutual attraction, and boom, an obstacle that they will obviously overcome. And in this case, it's a guy-centric obstacle. As a guy myself, I'm allowed to tell the truth. Men often get hung up on things that aren't important. In this case, who cares if Julie is a witch? Any mature single guy would love dating such a great woman. YouTuber stuff incoming. Please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Please tell your writer friends about my resources. And please...
buy my book! Buy my book! Buy my book! Buy my book!
I'm Kenneth Nichols, the alter ego of Allison Rhodes, reminding you... books are good.